In today's complex business environment, leaders need not only to be prepared for the worst, but also to build their resilience. At The Human Factor, Corporate Integrity Matters' Sonja Stirnimann invites top executives, board members, and industry experts to reflect and talk about the realities of corporate integrity, risk, and ethical leadership. As an international governance authority, independent director, and entrepreneur, she understands the challenges leaders face. Integrity and ethical leadership are not just principles. They build resilience, enhance reputation, and create strategic competitive advantage for organizations and for individuals.
Today, I'm honored to welcome you, Gitte Ganderup. Gitte is the co-founder of an AI and transformation consultancy back in 2018, when AI was viewed as somewhat super exotic. She has more than 20 years of experience in advising private sector clients in large-scale business transformation and operating model design. And today, she also serves as a member of advisory boards and advises corporates in how to respond to the opportunities that AI and technology gives without losing the human aspect. So in my discussions with global leaders, I never settle for the obvious, so also not today. What is written in a resume tells only a part of the story, but what truly shapes leadership in corporate integrity is something different, and that's what we talk about today. We also explore the unseen factors that influence the decision-making, risk, and the resilience at the top when it comes to AI and corporate integrity. What experience have shaped today's guest? That's what Gitte will tell us afterwards. What can we learn from someone who was one of the trendsetters back in 2018 when it comes to AI? So let's dive into Gitte's insights when it comes to questions of ethical leadership and corporate integrity in combination with AI. I'm really honored to have you here, Gitte. It's such a pleasure. And just let's get started with the first question.
Thank you for having me. It's going to be really interesting to talk about this topic that's very close to my heart.
And I know you have such a huge experience, and I really would like to know right now, so what role does corporate integrity play in your current roles as a board advisor and AI expert? Just combining these two parts, because I can imagine it's not always that easy.
It isn't. And obviously many boards right now, they're torn. Because on one hand, they have this fear of missing out. They're like, oh, we must do something with AI. On the other hand, they're also kind of wondering, yes, but what and how? And what are the risks? And the ones that are a bit more experienced on the boards will be going, okay, it's not just about opportunity, it's also about risk. And it's about real people who are actually our employees now diving into this world. How do we make sure that it's both ethical, but also we make the most of it?
You said fear of missing out. So can you see some tendencies or a priority lists? Because I think sometimes when you have such a, topic which goes all around, it suddenly steps up on the priority list. Do you think boards do that right now, or do it in a manner you think it makes sense?
I think there's a bit of rushing, I guess. There's a bit of, we must do something. We must be seen to do something. And you can see why. Also because you want to show your teams, your employees, that you're taking this seriously and you're with it, so to speak. So it's definitely gone up the priority, no doubt about that. But with that also comes we're diving into something we may not quite see. What are the risks? What are the potential costs for this? And some of those are kind of actual in pounds or dollars, but some of that is also risks to reputation if you get some of this wrong. So therefore, it's a bit of a double-edged thing. And in many ways, I mean, technology adoption is not new. There are many more things you can do with AI than you can do before. But on the other hand, before with other technology, you could also do interesting things. So yes, the landscape is changing, but it's not necessarily a revolution.
Yeah, but some people behave like that. And I would like to go back to what you said before about the risk and reputation. So what do you see, or maybe also what is your advice? Because I think it should be a huge topic. I'm not sure whether all boards are already at the level of awareness they should be when it comes to AI, ethical leadership, but also the risk of reputational loss.
Yes, I mean, the thing you need to make sure that the AI governance will cover things like, is it ethical? Is it secure? Is it legal? And you can imagine that you might be using some AI models that perhaps not uses the right data on the data in the right way, which means that the fairness of what the output is maybe not be up there. And that can very easily explode in your face, so to speak. That you can imagine an algorithm saying, well, actually, these are most important customers because they are very valuable. But if you haven't got a human in the loop to look at, does that mean we're actually treating them differently? And customers' perception of fairness is important, and therefore you can easily get a bad reputation if you sleepwalk into kind of some decision making about how to treat customers, for example. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. They have so many questions already out of that, I think, but also our audience, that's exactly. So how do we understand our clients, or do we understand what the perception of our clients or our stakeholders, not only the clients, will be? And what I often see, there are so many different models out there, and there are still a lot of companies just using the public ones. And I am not sure whether there are really guidelines in place, and also an awareness that how dangerous it is when people just upload the last presentations.
I actually think question one for most boards would have to be, how do we ensure that our team, our employees have got the right AI literacy?
Absolutely. Yeah.
In terms of where to put data, what to do with it, and what can I risk putting out in the public space. Now, obviously, you might imagine some organizations in the financial services space are very clear and have some really kind of strong boundaries in place that stops you dumping data out in the public space. And obviously, with large language models like ChatGPT and Claude, etc., you can do some fantastic things, and that's not to say you can't be using that. But sometimes you want actually internal models or internal layers in. Also because, without getting too technical, there are other AI disciplines that cannot be solved by those large language models. And sometimes there's a risk of missing out on some opportunities to do some really interesting things with your own data that isn't in the public space and never should be in the public space, like creating better insights about your customers, like making sure that your prices are right and the prices are right for the different kinds of customers, and making other strategic decisions about how do I position certain things. You don't want that in the public space. So this is where don't always go public. And I think hopefully most boards will be also aware of that. But AI literacy, that's where it starts. This is back to the human factor, isn't it? It's about real people using this and understanding what they should and could be doing.
I think it's really on the agenda of the boards, but sometimes I also think, or we are just wondering, and we also had other discussions saying, so do we know enough? And that's also a fear of missing out. Are we fast enough as board members, for example? Do we have all the information we need to have? Because if you start just doing your research by your own, it's endless, and you could do everything. And that's also what I think it's super important, that you have some kind of network. And that's what we do, for example, board members, also in the financial services industry, that we sit together and discuss, what are you doing? And what is your approach? Because I think we are all in a super steep learning curve right now, and we can only support our management teams if we are also informed and trained. Not in every detail, but we need to know where we can get the expertise from. How do you see that?
I think that's true. You can't have expert in everything on the board, but there is a base level of AI literacy. It's not about using it. It's not about being able to code or anything like that. It's more about both being aware of the risks. What are the questions we want to ask? So what are the right questions you want to ask of the teams for kind of AI governance purposes, but also for making sure we make the most of the opportunities, of course.
If you would just have 3 questions maybe for boards they need to ask. I know that's a super spontaneous question right now, so we did not prepare that, but I know you are the expert in that field, because I think that's exactly what people also want to hear. So what are the 3 most important questions from your expertise?
I think this is maybe more a question of the board rather than the board should be asking, but let's start there. Namely, the AI governance and the AI governance structure that should be in place. So it is things like who will govern, who will sign off on the AI usage we have in terms of what it's being used for, how it's being used, how robust is it, how fair is it, how accurate is it, And that in some ways is not dissimilar to the questions you'll ask of cybersecurity, as an example. They are reasonably similar for that. Question number 2, so there's the security angles, there's the ethical angles, and then I guess also there are the legal angles. You do want to make sure that you are complying with IP law and GDPR for that matter, for European countries, the EU AI Act, etc. So they may be fairly standard questions. You should still be asking them.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I think it's also a nice insight now for all the ones listening out in the world. So when it comes to that question also about ethics and AI, and I know you are in that space for many years. So has there been moments when your own integrity was in question, or when you said, okay, sorry, I just can't do that, or I cannot support what people would like to do now with AI?
No, I don't know whether that is lucky or not. In our team, in the AI consultancy, we had some very, very accomplished data scientists with PhDs from Cambridge and Oxford, as you might imagine. And some of them had specialisms in AI ethics, which means that already at the time when we would be agreeing projects with clients, we would be very clear on what could and should be done, and how to deal with underlying data, and how to deal with anything in the data that might be biased. Because you do talk about AI being biased. In fact, it's not the AI algorithms that are biased, it's the data they're trained on. And if you have data that is biased, then the output will be biased. But you can deal with that, and that's a thing to look out for. So we've never had this, can't remember a situation where there was something that could be perceived to be unethical in any way, shape, or form. But I guess we took that up front.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But let me give you an example of where that can be a problem. This is kind of a typical example. If you, for example, are using generative AI to create images, you can get it to create an image of a leader, a business leader.
It's always male, isn't it?
Yes, because that model is trained on images, pictures of business leaders. And if the large proportion of those images happen to be men, then obviously this is all statistics. Statistically, it will create an image that is of a man. That is not the algorithm that's a problem. That's the data you've trained it on.
Exactly. And so it would be super interesting also what you said before about the biases. But how can you do that? Or how did you that in your organization to avoid or just to minimize these kind of biases, knowing the data we have out there is like that? So I think it's very difficult, just to oversee that and control it.
Yeah, the easiest, there's two kind of versions of that. One of them is if you're doing your own in-house models, then you know what data it's trained on, and you understand your own data, and therefore you will be able to have the conversation about exactly how is this data skewed. When you're using external, of course, that is way more difficult. And that is when you should sit down up front and think about what are the potential biases that I want to avoid in the output here, and specify of the output that it needs to take certain things into consideration. And you can do that.
Exactly. So just maybe there's a too practical example, and I'm not an expert in that at all, but what I do when I just do some kind of prompts in public, so ChatGPT or whatever we have here, I really try to take out the biases first and really steer it in another direction. But I think that's also something people need to be aware of, potential biases. And I'm not yet sure whether we do that, because we are all quite new in learning these prompts, except, of course, the experts. And I think it should be one of the focus topics. Also, when it comes to the internal models we have, just to train people and make them aware of these potential biases.
Absolutely. I also mentor AI startups. So at most of the times I'll have kind of 2 or 3 AI startups that I'm mentoring. And obviously they're building something from scratch. And they have therefore the advantage of making sure that what they build is right and correct. So I'm doing this through one of these typical incubator companies. And one of the things that they are also focused on will be things like the integrity of the solution.
I think it's very important and super interesting also that you do that. I just had an idea. So do you see different level of integrity and ethical behavior in these kind of models? If you would have to rank some of the maybe public known models that you could say, I would rather go for this or that because of the data and the training they did with the data. to avoid biases?
I can't say that I have been testing the different models for that particular, so that might be a bit unfair.
Yeah, okay.
My personal preference happens to be Claude by Anthropic. It is set up to be what I believe kind of with some really good ethical guidelines. But
Okay.
obviously, they're large models. You can't actually see what has been done behind the scenes, and therefore, it would be a bit of a push, kind of recommending it from a technical perspective. I couldn't do that. But if you look at what are the guidelines they have been using, and that's why I predominantly use that one.
Okay, thank you very much. So also for the insights, because I think that's really also a very personal recommendation. So yeah, with all the disclaimers we can put here. So it's just right now when we record it, maybe in a few weeks or months, we have different information. So for all the ones who listen here, so don't take us for
exactly
for granted for the next few months or years. No, but thank you very much. It's really interesting. When you look back at your career, and I know it also interests our audience here. So have you been forced, or was your personal integrity during your career under pressure? And if so, what would have helped you?
I think when you work, especially with large kind of business transformation, that is often when a business either has got issues and really needs to fundamentally change themselves, or because there are opportunities in the market and they have to fundamentally change themselves to make the most of those opportunities. Both can happen. But in both cases, you're dealing with real people that have to change how they work. And as we all know, and someone famous once said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that is absolutely true. And what I have found the most difficult is obviously making sure that you do that in a way that is respectful for the teams that need to change. These are real people. And no one will change, by the way, if you send a random email thinking, oh, things will be different tomorrow. It doesn't work like that. So where my integrity have been most challenged have been if we have been disagreeing with kind of the companies about how much effort to put into that change.
Mm-hmm. And it's not only change, it's what I see, that also what we discussed in our pre-discussion, it's about transformation, and transformation often hurts. It hurts organization until you are there and you are transformed, but it's also super difficult, time-consuming and energy-consuming process for humans. And if you would like to go through transformation with your people, I think we have to be very careful and also how to support them in going through that phase.
Absolutely. This is back to no one changes just because you get an email, perhaps quite the opposite. And actually experienced adults who want to do a good job, and I truly believe that almost everyone wants to do a good job, because otherwise life would be pretty damn boring, wouldn't it? If they're faced with something that has to change, and they have to learn something, that's hard. That's probably even harder for adults than it is for children, probably. And you have to be respectful of that and making sure that people have the support they need.
They need to have the support, and we have to be respectful. You need to have a safe space when you can also speak up if something doesn't work. And people have different speeds to transform. And I think that's also what we have to take into consideration when it comes to integrity. So different cultures, different speeds, and it all needs to be part of the support process.
One of the people I sometimes look to for a bit of inspiration in terms of how do we attack this change, so to speak, is the author Dan Pink. Mm-hmm. And he wrote about what motivates people the most. And the three things are basically mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So mastery, being good at something. Well, then if you are to introduce a change, you have to help people being good at what they do. Autonomy, about having influence on how you do things. And back to your point about what speed people actually can change at. And purpose, the why.
Yeah, absolutely.
So back to your question about when has my integrity been challenged? It has mostly been if we couldn't land on what I thought was the best way of kind of executing that change with people. It's all about people.
Very interesting. And it leads me to the next question. Do you think, because I had a discussion a few weeks ago, and some people really think that AI will also replace people when it comes to connections and interactions. not only answers, but real connections?
I think that's a difficult question. And maybe there's also a generational thing, because I kind of like real people. I would say that. So a couple of things with AI though. One of them is even before we talk about connections, but just what goes on with it. In many cases, and for many years probably, you still need a human in the loop. Because judgment calls are not all about statistics and data. It's also about understanding a wider context than that sometimes is to do with the kind of people you've been talking to, real clients, real customers, for example. So there's something about the human in the loop under all circumstances. Can it create other connections? I personally find it difficult to see, but one of the startups, the AI startups in the cohort I've been mentoring, not one of mine, but one in the cohort, they are creating a coaching, an AI coach for people who may not be able to afford a physical real coach. And obviously then you're starting to get into the world of, can you create a connection that's meaningful enough for you to actually be helped by that person? Yeah. And it's not meant to be kind of a coach for deep personal problems. I think this is more about professional coaching, if that makes sense. And me being perhaps a bit of an old fart, I was a bit kind of skeptical, thinking, "Ooh, can something really do that?" I think the jury's out. I don't think it's entirely impossible, but I do think that companies, back to the world of business, companies that offer a human connection with customers will remain and will have an absolute advantage. I totally prefer to talk to real people.
And maybe it's really a generational issue. Maybe generations after us, they don't need that anymore. I had a conversation yesterday with one of my peers, and he also said he downloaded a AI coaching app for his behavior when it comes to sports. And after a few weeks, he just said, you know what? If that AI is asking me every morning how I feel, I don't want to respond to that, because I know the AI is not interested in that. Yeah. It's really the connection, but maybe it's really a generational topic. So what would you advise, or how would you advise the next generation when it comes to integrity, ethical leadership, and AI?
I think that is a really good question. The next generation. I guess some of this is back to AI literacy, actually, and understanding the difference between something that is system generated and sometimes isn't. And actually, if you make a considerate choice about how you interact with something, then you can make that choice to say, actually, I'm okay with it being a bot of sorts, some sort of an AI bot that I engage with. If I make a conscious decision about it, that may not be that much of a problem. I would be sad if it would replace all of your other human connections. I like to be on the positive and optimistic side, to go, I do think that people actually will, at the end of the day, revert to having at least a number of human connections, and they will treasure those.
Well, thank you very much. And I think it's also a good point to stop. I would have a lot of other questions also when it comes to robotics. I know you also have experience there, but maybe we can have just another conversation in a few weeks or so and go on with robotics and ethical leadership and integrity. It would be a pleasure. So, Gitte, thank you for your valuable insights and reflections of today. So the ethical part of AI is more relevant than ever before. That's what you said, but you also hope and assume that there are still a few connections everybody needs to have also in the future. So I highly appreciate your contribution. I'm sure also our global audience does right now. So thank you, and I wish you all the best also on your personal path, and hope to have you here again soon.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
This was another episode of the Human Factor Corporate Integrity Matters. With one of my highly appreciated guests today, it was Gitte Ganderup, where we uncover the leadership strategies that define governance, risk, and resilience. Guided by the principle, corporate integrity is the foundation of trust, resilience, and long-term success. Thank you for listening. I'm Sonja Stirnimann, your host. Stay aware, act decisively, and lead with integrity. Take care and have a good time.